Elena didn't know that the man standing in her father's study was the most powerful alpha in the realm. She didn't know that the debt collector's cold silver eyes had been searching for her across kingdoms for 3 years, and she certainly didn't know that her desperate plea would bind her to him forever. What she did know was that her hands were trembling so violently she could barely hold the crumpled papers her father had hidden beneath his mattress. The gambling debts. The impossibly large numbers written in her father's shaking handwriting. 50,000 gold pieces. More money than a blacksmith could earn in 10 lifetimes. "Miss Thornfield." The debt collector's voice was like winter frost over steel, cutting through her spiralling panic with surgical precision. "I trust you've reviewed the documentation." Elena forced herself to meet those silver eyes, though something in her chest clenched tight at the contact. He stood perfectly still by her father's bookshelf, one hand resting casually on the leather-bound spine of a volume on metalworking. Everything about him spoke of controlled power, from the expensive cut of his dark coat to the way he held himself like a predator comfortable in any territory. "My father is dying," she whispered, the words scraping raw against her throat. "The physician says his heart cannot take much more strain. These debts, the worry has already nearly killed him." The debt collector's expression didn't change, but she caught something flickering in those impossible silver eyes, something that made her breath catch for reasons she couldn't name. "Your father's medical condition is unfortunate," he said, his tone giving nothing away. "However, the parties I represent have been more than patient. 3 months past due, Miss Thornfield. My employer's generosity has limits." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. 3 months. While she'd been nursing her father through his weakening spells, believing his exhaustion came from working too hard at the forge, he'd been drowning in debt to people who clearly didn't believe in mercy. "What happens if we can't pay?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, though she already knew the answer would be something that would haunt her dreams. The debt collector moved then, stepping away from the bookshelf with liquid grace that seemed almost inhuman. He was taller than she'd first realized, and when he approached her father's desk where she stood clutching the damning papers, Elena had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Collection methods become unpleasant," he said softly. "Your father's debts were accrued through underground gambling rings that don't typically extend payment plans. They prefer more immediate forms of compensation." The way he said it sent cold terror down Elena's spine. Her father, who could barely lift his hammer anymore, who spent most days struggling to breathe, would never survive whatever immediate compensation meant in that world. "How long?" she asked, though speaking the words felt like sealing her father's death warrant. 1 week, 7 days. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossibility crushing down on her shoulders. Even if she sold everything they owned, worked every hour of every day for the rest of her life, she could never raise 50,000 gold pieces. Her father was going to die, and it would be because she couldn't save him. Unless, "Take me instead." The words tumbled out before she could think them through, born from desperation and love that ran deeper than reason. "My father is dying. He can't work, can't earn money to pay his debts. But I can. I'm young, I'm healthy, I can work. Take me as payment instead of him." The silence that followed was so complete Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The debt collector had gone perfectly still, and something in his silver eyes blazed brighter, like starlight reflecting off a blade. "You're offering yourself as collateral for your father's debts," he said, and his voice had dropped lower, taking on an edge that made something deep in Elena's chest respond with unwanted heat. "Yes." She lifted her chin, trying to project courage she didn't feel. "Whatever work needs to be done, whatever compensation is required, I'll provide it. Just leave my father alone." The debt collector circled around the desk with that same predatory grace, coming to stand directly in front of her. This close, Elena could catch the faint scent of something wild and dangerous, like pine forests and winter storms. When he reached out to take the debt papers from her shaking hands, his fingers brushed against hers. The contact hit Elena like lightning. Heat blazed through every nerve ending, spreading from the point where their skin touched up her arm and straight to her chest, where something golden and warm unfurled like flower petals in sunlight. Her breath caught audibly, and she saw the debt collector's pupils dilate, his nostrils flaring as if he could scent something in the air that she couldn't identify. For a moment that stretched like eternity, they stood frozen, connected by that brief touch that somehow felt like coming home and stepping off a cliff at the same time. Elena felt pulled toward him by an invisible thread she didn't understand, drawn to this dangerous stranger in a way that defied all logic and self-preservation. Then he stepped back, breaking the contact, and Elena nearly stumbled from the sudden absence of that strange warmth. "You would bind yourself to strangers to save a dying man," he said, his voice rougher now, as if something had shifted in his throat. "You have no idea what kind of work might be required of you, no guarantee of your safety or well-being, yet you're willing to sacrifice yourself." "He's my father," Elena said simply, though her heart was still racing from whatever had just passed between them. "I won't let him die in fear and shame because of debts I could have prevented if I'd been paying attention." The debt collector studied her for a long moment, those silver eyes seeming to catalogue every detail of her face. Eleanor felt exposed under that intense scrutiny, as if he could see straight through to her soul and was weighing what he found there. "Very well," he said finally, and Elena's knees nearly buckled with relief. "I accept your offer, Miss Thornfield. You will come with me immediately to begin working off your father's debts." "Immediately?" Elena's voice cracked. She'd expected to have time to say goodbye, to make arrangements for her father's care. "The parties I represent don't believe in delays," he said, moving to the window to glance outside, where Eleanor now noticed a luxurious black carriage waited. "Your father's medical expenses will be handled as part of our arrangement. He'll receive the best care available while you fulfill your obligations." Elena's head spun. Medical expenses, the best care available. That kind of treatment would cost more than her father's debts. Yet this man spoke of it like a minor detail. "Who exactly do you represent?" she asked, though something told her she might not want to know the answer. The debt collector's smile was sharp as a blade's edge. "People with very long reach and very little patience for those who break their agreements. You'll learn more once we're underway." He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her with those unsettling silver eyes. "You should pack quickly, Miss Thornfield. We leave within the hour." "Pack?" Elena's mind struggled to keep up. "How long will I be gone?" "That depends entirely on how quickly you can work off 50,000 gold pieces," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested the answer was longer than she wanted to contemplate. "I suggest you bring everything you value. You may not be returning to this cottage for some time." With that, he was gone, leaving Elena alone in her father's study, with the scent of winter storms and the echo of heat still tingling in her fingertips where he touched her. Through the window she watched him stride to the black carriage with the confidence of a man who owned the world and everyone in it. What had she just agreed to? And why did the golden warmth in her chest pulse stronger every time she thought about those silver eyes? Elena pressed a shaking hand to her heart, where something had awakened that she didn't understand. In trying to save her father, she had the terrifying suspicion she'd just traded away her entire life to the most dangerous man she'd ever met. But as she climbed the narrow stairs to pack her few belongings, one thought burned brighter than her fear. Her father would live. Whatever price she had to pay, whatever work awaited her, it would be worth it to see him healthy again, even if it meant following a mysterious debt collector with silver eyes and secrets into an unknown future that felt like stepping into the heart of a storm. The carriage that waited outside Elena's cottage was nothing like any vehicle a debt collector should own. Rich burgundy leather lined the interior, soft as butter against her fingertips. Silver fixtures gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, and the horses that pulled it were clearly thoroughbreds worth more than her father's forge. As they rolled through the countryside, Elena found herself pressed against velvet cushions that probably cost more than she'd ever earned in her life. "This seems excessive for debt collection," she said, trying to keep the tremor from her voice as she watched familiar landmarks disappear behind them. The man across from her, he still hadn't given his name, sat perfectly still, those silver eyes fixed on the passing scenery. "My employers believe in making impressions," he replied without looking at her. "First impressions matter in business negotiations." Elena wanted to point out that their negotiation was already concluded, but something about his tone warned her against pressing the issue. Instead, she focused on the landscape outside the window, which was changing from the modest farming villages she knew to rolling hills, dotted with estates that grew larger and more impressive with each passing mile. After 2 hours of travel, the carriage turned onto a private road lined with ancient oak trees. Elena's breath caught as they approached iron gates that stood at least 20 feet high, topped with spear points that gleamed like fangs. Beyond the gates, a massive stone structure rose against the sky, like something from the old fairy tales her mother used to tell. It wasn't just large, it was impossible. "This is where you work?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper as they passed through gates that swung open without anyone touching them. "Among other places," the debt collector said, and she caught something that might have been amusement in his tone. The carriage swept up a circular drive paved with stones that looked like polished marble. Gardens stretched in every direction, maintained with precision that spoke of an army of groundskeepers. Fountains sparkled in the fading sunlight, and Eleanor counted at least 3 separate buildings that could have housed her entire village. When the carriage finally stopped, Eleanor's hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time, but from the growing realization that she had vastly underestimated what she'd gotten herself into. Debt collectors didn't live in palaces. They didn't own horses worth fortunes or carriages lined with precious metals. The door opened, and the debt collector stepped out first, then turned to offer her his hand. Elena hesitated, remembering the lightning bolt of sensation from their first touch, but she could hardly refuse without seeming rude. When his fingers closed around hers, that same golden warmth blazed through her nervous system, and she saw his pupils dilate again in response. "Welcome to Ravenshollow," he said, his voice rougher than it had been in her father's study. 2 men approached from the entrance of the impossible building, and Elena's blood went cold as she watched them bow deeply to her companion. Not the casual nod servants might give to an employer's representative, but the kind of formal deference reserved for nobility, or royalty. "Your Majesty," one of them said, "we weren't expecting your return until tomorrow." Eleanor's world tilted sideways. Your Majesty. The debt collector, who had accepted her desperate bargain, who had touched her hand and set her nerves on fire, who had agreed to take her in place of her father's debts, was royalty. Not just any royalty, given the size of this place and the reverence in the servants' voices. "Plans changed," he said calmly, as if having a woman nearly faint beside him was an everyday occurrence. "Please see that Miss Thornfield's belongings are taken to the Rose Suite, and send word to Master Aldrich that his services may be required." Elena tried to pull her hand free from his grip, but his fingers tightened gently, keeping her steady as her knees threatened to buckle. The golden thread between them hummed with something that felt like comfort, even as her mind screamed that she was in terrible danger. "Your Majesty," she whispered, the words feeling foreign and impossible on her tongue. He turned those silver eyes on her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression softened slightly. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside, Miss Thornfield. You look pale." Eleanor wanted to argue that she felt more than pale. She felt like she might shatter into pieces, but her voice seemed to have deserted her. She allowed him to guide her up the sweeping stone steps and through doors that were easily twice her height, made from wood so dark and polished it looked like black glass. The entry hall beyond was larger than the entire ground floor of her cottage. tapestries hung from walls that soared 3 stories overhead, depicting scenes of wolves running beneath silver moons. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across marble floors inlaid with precious metals, and Eleanor caught glimpses of corridors stretching away in multiple directions like the spokes of a wheel. "You're not a debt collector," she said, her voice echoing in the vast space. It wasn't a question. "No," he agreed, finally releasing her hand, though the golden warmth continued to pulse between them. "I am not." "Then who are you?" Eleanor backed away from him, suddenly aware that she was completely alone with a man who could afford to build palaces, who commanded the kind of respect that made grown men bow and scrape. "My name is Marcus Ravencrest," he said, watching her with those intense silver eyes. "And you, Elena Thornfield, are standing in the throne room of the Northern Realms Alpha King." The words hit Elena like physical blows. Alpha King, the most powerful, most feared leader in all the known territories. Stories were told about the Alpha King's ruthlessness, his supernatural strength, his ability to crush entire armies with a gesture. Children were warned that the Alpha King would come for them if they misbehaved. He was legend and nightmare wrapped in human form, and she had offered herself to him as payment for gambling debts. "I have to leave," Elena said, the words tumbling out as panic rose in her throat. "This was a mistake. I didn't know. I can't possibly be here. You're the Alpha King." She turned toward the massive doors, but they had closed behind her, and when she reached them, they wouldn't budge despite her desperate pushing. The metal handles felt ice-cold under her palms, and she realized with growing terror that she was trapped in a palace with the most dangerous predator alive. "Eleanor?" His voice was closer than it should have been, and she spun around to find him standing just a few feet away. He hadn't moved with any supernatural speed, but she'd been so focused on the doors that she hadn't heard his approach. "Why?" she whispered, pressing her back against the unyielding wood. "Why would the Alpha King accept a bargain with a blacksmith's daughter? What could you possibly want with someone like me?" Something flickered across his face then, an expression too complex for Elena to decipher. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd yet heard it. "You offered yourself to save your father's life," he said. "You were willing to sacrifice everything for someone you love, without knowing what that sacrifice might cost you. Do you have any idea how rare that kind of courage is?" Elena shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I accepted your offer not because I needed another servant, Miss Thornfield. I accepted it because of what you are to me." "I don't understand." Marcus moved closer, slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "In our world, there are bonds that transcend choice or logic, connections that exist before birth and last beyond death. When you touched my hand in your father's study, you felt something, didn't you?" Elena's breath caught as she remembered the lightning bolt of sensation, the golden warmth that still pulsed between them. "I don't know what that was. I do." His silver eyes seemed to glow in the crystal light from the chandeliers. "You are my mate, Elena, my destined partner, the other half of my soul. I have been searching for you for 3 years." The words should have sounded insane, should have sent her running for the doors again, demanding to be released from whatever supernatural madness she'd stumbled into. Instead, something deep in Elena's chest recognized the truth of what he was saying, even as her mind rejected it. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Is it?" Marcus reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and when she didn't pull away, he brushed his fingers against her cheek. The golden thread blazed brighter, and Eleanor felt an overwhelming sense of rightness, of pieces clicking into place that she hadn't even realized were scattered. "You're free to leave," he said softly, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I meant what I said about your father's debts. They're already paid, and Master Aldrich is the finest healer in the realm. Your father will recover whether you stay or go." Elena stared up at him, caught between terror and a growing sense of something that felt dangerously like hope. Then why did you bring me here? Because I'm asking you to give me 1 week, Marcus said, his silver eyes never leaving hers. 1 week to prove that what exists between us is worth exploring. 1 week to show you that the bond you feel isn't something to fear, but something to treasure. And if I still want to leave after a week? Then I'll have a carriage waiting to take you wherever you wish to go, he promised, with enough gold to ensure you and your father never worry about money again. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible decision settling on her shoulders. Everything she thought she knew about her life had been shattered in the space of a few hours. She was standing in a palace, being courted by the most powerful man alive, feeling a supernatural bond pull at her heart like a golden chain. When she opened her eyes, Marcus was still watching her with infinite patience, as if he would wait forever for her answer. 1 week, she whispered, and watched something like relief bloom across his devastating features. 1 week, he agreed, his hand still warm against her skin. Thank you, Elena, for your trust and for your courage. As he led her deeper into the palace, Elena tried to ignore the voice in her head that whispered she was walking into the heart of a storm that would change everything. But the golden thread between them hummed with contentment, and for the first time since her father had fallen ill, Eleanor felt something that might have been hope kindling in her chest, even if it terrified her to acknowledge it. The days that followed were a whirlwind of confusion and wonder that left Elena feeling like she was living someone else's life. The rose suite where she'd been installed was larger than her entire cottage, with windows that overlooked gardens so perfectly manicured they looked like paintings. Servants appeared at her slightest need, addressing her as Miss Thornfield, with the same respectful tone they used for visiting nobility. Marcus had kept his word about giving her space. He appeared for meals, polite and attentive, but never pressing, never making her feel trapped, despite the impossibility of her situation. When she walked the gardens, he would sometimes join her, pointing out rare flowers or sharing stories about the estate's history. His presence had begun to feel less threatening and more comforting, though Eleanor tried not to examine that feeling too closely. It was on the 4th morning that everything changed. Elena was breaking her fast in the smaller dining hall when she heard the commotion from the main courtyard. Raised voices, the sound of multiple horses, and an undercurrent of tension that made something in her chest clench tight. Through the tall windows she could see a group of men in formal robes dismounting from travel-worn horses, their faces grim with purpose. "Who are they?" she asked Thomas, the elderly servant who had been attending her meals. Thomas's expression darkened as he followed her gaze. "The Alpha Council, miss. They weren't expected for another fortnight." The way he said it made Eleanor's blood run cold. She'd heard whispers about the Alpha Council from other servants. Powerful leaders from across the realm who advised the Alpha King on matters of state and tradition. Their unexpected arrival couldn't mean anything good. Elena excused herself from breakfast and found herself drawn toward the main throne room, despite knowing she probably shouldn't eavesdrop on royal business. But as she approached the massive doors, she could hear voices raised in argument, and her name being mentioned with tones that made her stomach turn. "This is unprecedented, Your Majesty," came a gravelly voice thick with disapproval. "Taking a mate without proper courtship protocols, without council approval, without even confirming her bloodline heritage." "My mate bond is not subject to council approval," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made Eleanor's spine straighten even from outside the room. "A blacksmith's daughter," another voice scoffed. "A commoner with no training in court protocols, no understanding of our ways. She could never represent the Northern Realm with proper dignity." Elena pressed closer to the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Have you even confirmed she can bear alpha heirs?" the first voice continued. "Her bloodline could be completely unsuitable for royal succession. This infatuation will pass, Your Majesty, but the damage to your reputation—" "Enough!" Marcus's voice had dropped to a tone that made Elena's breath catch. She'd never heard him sound dangerous before, but now there was something predatory in his words that reminded her exactly what he was. "Elena Thornfield is my mate. That bond was forged by forces greater than council politics or bloodline registries. If you question her worth, you question my judgment." "We question your wisdom in elevating a servant to queen without proper evaluation," came the sharp retort. "This girl has no noble blood, no training, no understanding of what it means to rule. She's a pretty distraction who will become a liability the moment real challenges arise." Elena's hands flew to her mouth to stifle a sob. Every cruel word was like a knife to her chest, because part of her feared they were right. What business did a blacksmith's daughter have in a palace? How could she ever be worthy of someone like Marcus? "Perhaps," suggested a third voice, smoother and more calculating than the others, "we could arrange a more suitable match. Lady Catherine Blackthorne has excellent breeding, extensive political connections, and her family has served the crown for generations. A strategic alliance rather than this romantic impulse." The golden thread in Elena's chest went cold as winter steel. They were discussing replacing her like she was a piece of furniture that didn't match the decor. She pressed her back against the stone wall, fighting the urge to run back to her rooms and hide until this nightmare conversation ended. "I will say this once more," Marcus said, and Elena could hear him moving, probably pacing as he did when he was thinking through a problem. "Elena Thornfield is my destined mate. The bond between us is not negotiable, not replaceable, and not subject to your political manoeuvring. If you cannot accept that reality, perhaps it's time to reconsider your positions on this council." "Your Majesty," the first voice started. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, cutting off the protest, "your assessment of her character is both premature and incorrect. She offered herself as payment for her father's debts to people she believed would harm her if she refused. She did this knowing she might never see her family again, might be forced into labour or worse. That level of selfless courage is exactly the quality I want beside me on the throne." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but before she could process Marcus's defence of her, she heard new sounds from the courtyard, shouts, the clash of steel. The distinctive howl of wolves that raised every hair on her arms. "Attack!" someone screamed from outside. "The estate is under attack!" The throne room erupted in activity. Elena pressed herself against the wall as the massive doors burst open and council members rushed past her, heading for whatever crisis was unfolding in the courtyard. Through the chaos, she caught sight of Marcus, his silver eyes blazing with fury as he barked orders at his guards. "Protect the council members," he commanded, "and find Miss Thornfield, now." Elena's heart lurched. She wanted to call out to him, to tell him she was right there, but the courtyard sounds were growing closer and more violent. Through the windows, she could see shapes moving too fast to be entirely human. Shifters in their wolf forms, attacking with coordinated precision. A servant girl, no older than Elena, came running down the corridor, tears streaming down her face. "Miss, you need to hide," she gasped. "They're targeting the palace specifically, looking for someone." Before Elena could ask who they were looking for, a massive wolf burst through one of the tall windows in an explosion of glass and snarling fury. Not one of Marcus's guards. This wolf's eyes glowed red instead of silver, and its hackles were raised in pure aggression. The servant girl screamed and stumbled backward. Without thinking, Eleanor stepped forward, placing herself between the wolf and the terrified girl. "Run!" Eleanor commanded, never taking her eyes off the wolf. "Find the guards." The wolf's red gaze fixed on Elena, and something in its posture changed. Recognition. This wasn't a random attack. They were here for her specifically. Elena had never faced a supernatural predator before, but her instincts screamed at her to run. Instead, she held her ground as the wolf began stalking toward her, lips pulled back to reveal fangs that could tear her throat out in seconds. "Elena?" Marcus's voice came from behind her, deadly calm. "Step away from the window." She wanted to obey, wanted to run to him and let him handle the threat, but the wolf was positioned between her and safety. If she moved, it would strike. "I can't," she whispered, never taking her eyes off the predator. "It's blocking my path." What happened next would be burned into Eleanor's memory forever. Marcus shifted. The transformation was both beautiful and terrifying, human form dissolving into that of a massive silver wolf that was easily twice the size of their attacker. His eyes blazed with supernatural fire, and when he growled, the sound made the palace walls vibrate. The red-eyed wolf seemed to realize its mistake too late. It lunged for Elena, but Marcus was faster, intercepting it mid-leap and driving it to the marble floor with bone-crushing force. The fight that followed was brief and brutal, ending with the attacking wolf lying motionless and Marcus standing over it, silver fur stained with blood that wasn't his own. When Marcus shifted back to human form, Eleanor saw him properly for the first time, not as the controlled, elegant man who had been courting her with careful patience, but as the supernatural predator he truly was. Power radiated from every line of his body, and his silver eyes still glowed with protective fury. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual as he approached her. Eleanor shook her head, though she was trembling from head to toe. "The servant girl is safe," Marcus assured her. "My guards found her." He reached for Eleanor's hands, and when their skin made contact, that familiar golden warmth blazed through her nerves. But now she understood it differently. Not just attraction or supernatural chemistry, but a bond forged between two predators who would protect each other against any threat. "They came for me," Elena said, finally understanding the attack's purpose. "Didn't they?" Marcus's expression darkened. Eliminating an alpha's mate is an old tactic for weakening his position. Make him choose between protecting his people and protecting his bond. "But I'm not." Elena started to say she wasn't really his mate, wasn't really anything important, but the words died in her throat. Because standing there in the aftermath of violence, feeling the absolute certainty of Marcus's protection and the way her own instincts had driven her to shield an innocent girl, Elena realized something had fundamentally changed inside her. She'd stopped running. When faced with danger, she hadn't thought about escape or self-preservation. She'd thought about protecting someone weaker than herself. "You stood your ground," Marcus said softly, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "You protected my people when you could have hidden or fled. Do you understand what that means?" Eleanor met his silver gaze and felt something lock into place in her chest. Not just the golden thread of their bond, but her own sense of belonging in this impossible world. "I think," she whispered, "I'm beginning to understand." Through the broken window, the sounds of battle were fading as Marcus's guards secured the estate. The Alpha Council would have questions, would want explanations and security reviews. But for this moment, Elena stood in the wreckage of her old life and felt the first stirrings of something that might have been confidence. She was the Alpha King's mate, and perhaps, just perhaps, she was beginning to believe she might actually be worthy of the title. The golden thread between them hummed with contentment as Marcus lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that felt like a promise. "Welcome to your real life, Elena," he murmured against her skin. "I hope you're ready for the adventure." Despite everything, the attack, the council's cruel words, the impossibility of her situation, Eleanor found herself smiling. "I think I might be," she whispered back, and meant it. 2 weeks had passed since the attack, and Eleanor found herself settling into palace life with surprising ease. The Alpha Council had departed with grudging acknowledgement that she'd proven herself during the crisis, though their parting words still stung. But Marcus's unwavering support had begun to heal those wounds, and Elena discovered she had a natural aptitude for the diplomatic skills required of a future queen. She'd started joining Marcus for his morning audiences with petitioners, offering insights that surprised both of them with their wisdom. When a dispute arose between neighbouring villages over water rights, Eleanor suggested a solution that satisfied both parties while strengthening trade relationships. Her empathy for common struggles, combined with her growing understanding of noble politics, made her an invaluable adviser. Marcus watched her with something that looked dangerously like pride, and the golden thread between them hummed with increasing contentment. Elena had even begun to believe that perhaps the council had been wrong about her worthiness. That fragile confidence shattered the moment her father arrived at the palace gates. Elena rushed to greet him, her heart soaring at seeing him upright and healthy for the first time in months. The royal physicians had worked miracles. His colour was good, his breathing easy, and when he embraced her, his arms were strong around her shoulders. "My darling girl," he murmured against her hair. "When I received word you were here, at the Alpha King's palace, I could hardly believe it." "Father," Elena breathed, tears of joy streaming down her face, "you look wonderful. The healers said you'd recovered, but seeing you like this—" But her father's expression was troubled as he pulled back to look at her. "Elena, I need to speak with you about your stepmother, about debts you don't know exist." Elena's blood went cold. "What do you mean?" Her father glanced around the opulent entrance hall, clearly overwhelmed by the palace's grandeur. "Perhaps we could speak privately. This matter concerns your future, and I fear the news I bring will change everything." They found a quiet sitting room overlooking the rose gardens, and Elena's father accepted tea with hands that trembled slightly despite his improved health. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with shame and regret. "Elena, after your mother died, I made many mistakes," he began. "The grief, it drove me to gambling, as you know, but there were other debts, other obligations. Your stepmother, Vivian, she had her own creditors." Elena's heart began to race. "What kind of obligations, father?" "Marriage contracts," he said quietly, unable to meet her eyes. "Vivian sold your marriage rights to settle her gambling debts, to Alpha Darius Blackwood of the Eastern Territories." The words hit Elena like physical blows. Marriage rights, sold, to another Alpha. "That's impossible," Elena whispered. "You never would have agreed to that." "I was dying," her father said, his voice breaking. "Vivian told me you'd already agreed, that you wanted to secure both our futures. I was too weak to question it, too grateful that someone was handling the arrangements. I signed the papers without reading them properly." Elena's hands began to shake. "What papers?" Her father reached into his travel bag and withdrew a rolled parchment sealed with dark wax. Elena's name was written across it in formal script, and below that, words that made her stomach turn. "Binding marriage contract, Eastern Territories." "The contract becomes enforceable on your 20th birthday," her father continued. "Elena, that's tomorrow." The sitting room spun around Elena as the implications crashed over her. Tomorrow, less than 24 hours before she would be legally bound to a stranger, before everything she'd begun to build with Marcus would be torn away. "Darius Blackwood," she whispered. "I've heard that name." Her father's expression darkened. A brutal man by all accounts. His first 2 wives died under mysterious circumstances. But the contract is magically binding, Eleanor. Breaking it would mean death for both you and anyone who tried to help you. Elena shot to her feet, pacing to the window as panic rose in her throat. The golden thread in her chest was screaming, pulling tight with an ache that felt like her soul being torn in half. "There has to be a way out," she said desperately. "Some legal loophole, some way to challenge the contract." "Only one," her father said quietly. "Trial by combat. If another Alpha were to challenge Darius for your hand and win, the contract would be void, but Elena, who would risk their life for—" "I would." Elena spun around to find Marcus standing in the doorway, his silver eyes blazing with fury and determination. How long had he been listening? How much had he heard? "Marcus!" Elena breathed, her heart breaking at the pain she saw in his expression. He entered the room with that predatory grace she'd come to recognise, nodding respectfully to her father before focusing entirely on Elena. "Show me the contract." Elena's father handed over the parchment with obvious reluctance. Marcus read it quickly, his jaw tightening with each line. "Magically binding," he confirmed grimly, "and enforceable at sunset tomorrow. Darius is already en route. My scouts reported his party crossed into our territory this morning." "You can't fight him," Elena said desperately. "Marcus, I won't let you risk your life because of my stepmother's treachery." Marcus looked up from the contract, his silver eyes soft despite the fury burning behind them. "Elena, you are my mate, my destined partner, my other half. There is no risk I wouldn't take to keep you safe. But if you lose, I won't lose." The quiet confidence in his voice made Elena's breath catch. "But I need to know that you're choosing me, not just accepting rescue from an unwanted marriage. This has to be your decision." Elena stared at him, feeling the weight of the impossible choice settling on her shoulders. She could honour the contract, sacrifice herself to protect Marcus from a fight that might kill him. She could run, though that would likely result in her death and severe consequences for her father. Or she could choose Marcus, publicly, irrevocably, knowing that her choice would strengthen him for the coming battle, but also make her complicit if anything happened to him. "Elena," her father said gently, "whatever you decide, I'll support you. I'm so sorry my weakness created this situation." Elena moved to her father, taking his hands in hers. "Your weakness didn't create this, father. Vivian's greed did, and your love saved my life. Without those gambling debts, I never would have met Marcus." She turned to face Marcus, the golden thread between them blazing with certainty despite her fear. "I choose you," she said clearly, "not because you're rescuing me from an unwanted marriage, but because I love you, because the thought of belonging to anyone else makes me feel like I can't breathe, because you saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself." Something blazed in Marcus's silver eyes. Triumph, love, and fierce protectiveness all rolled into one devastating expression. "Then we better prepare for company," he said grimly. "Darius will be here by evening, and the combat will take place at sunset tomorrow. Elena, I need you to understand. Once you publicly declare your choice, there's no going back. Win or lose, you'll have made enemies in the Eastern Territories." "I understand," Elena said, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Marcus moved to her then, taking her face in his hands with infinite gentleness. "I need you to know that I will fight for you with everything I have, but I also need you to know that your love, your choice to stand with me, gives me strength I never knew I possessed." When he kissed her, the golden thread between them exploded into molten fire. Elena felt his determination flowing through their bond, his absolute certainty that he would win, his overwhelming love for her wrapping around her like armour. When they broke apart, Elena's father was smiling despite the gravity of their situation. "Your mother would be proud," he told Elena softly. "She always said you had the courage of a queen." That evening, as promised, Alpha Darius Blackwood arrived at Ravenshollow with a retinue of guards that looked more like an invasion force. Elena watched from her window as they made camp in the courtyard, their leader a massive man with cold, dark eyes and scars that told of a life built on violence. When Marcus came to escort her to dinner, Elena was surprised to find herself calm. The panic and uncertainty had crystallized into something harder, more determined. "Are you ready for this?" Marcus asked, studying her face. Eleanor thought about everything that had led her to this moment. Her father's debts, her desperate bargain, the slow growth of trust and love between her and Marcus. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 weeks ago, terrified and convinced of her own worthlessness, and the woman she was becoming. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it. Tomorrow would bring combat that would determine her entire future. But tonight she would stand beside the man she loved and publicly claim him as her choice, knowing that her courage would give him the strength he needed to win. The golden thread between them hummed with certainty as Marcus offered her his arm. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, and Elena was finally beginning to understand that together they were stronger than any threat that dared challenge them. The great hall of Ravenshollow had been transformed into an arena. Representatives from every major pack in the Northern Realm had arrived throughout the day, summoned by the ancient laws that governed trials by combat. Elena stood at the edge of the circular space that had been cleared for the fight, her heart hammering so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. Sunset was approaching, painting the sky beyond the tall windows in shades of gold and crimson that seemed ominous rather than beautiful. In less than an hour, Marcus would face Darius Blackwood in combat that would determine not only Elena's fate, but the political balance of the supernatural world. "You look pale, little dove," came a voice like grinding stone from behind her. Elena turned to face Alpha Darius Blackwood, and every instinct she possessed screamed at her to run. He was even more imposing up close, easily as tall as Marcus but broader, with the kind of muscle that spoke of countless battles. Scars crisscrossed his arms and neck, and his dark eyes held the cold calculation of a predator who had never known defeat. "Alpha Blackwood," Eleanor said, proud that her voice remained steady despite her terror. "Soon to be your husband," Darius replied, with a smile that held no warmth. "This combat is a formality, you understand. Ravencrest is powerful, but he's grown soft with too many years of peace. I've been fighting wars while he's been playing politics." Eleanor lifted her chin, feeling the golden thread in her chest pulse with defiant fire. "You're wrong about him, and you're wrong about me." Darius laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "A blacksmith's daughter telling me I'm wrong? You have spirit, little dove. I'll enjoy breaking it." Before Elena could respond, Marcus appeared at her side with that liquid grace she'd come to associate with barely controlled power. He was dressed for combat in simple black leather that wouldn't restrict his movement, and his silver eyes blazed with predatory focus. "Blackwood," he said calmly, though Eleanor could feel the tension radiating from every line of his body. "I see you're attempting to intimidate my mate before our fight. How predictable." "Your mate?" Darius's expression twisted with contempt. "She's contracted to me, Ravencrest. This combat is nothing more than a desperate attempt to steal what's already mine." "She's mine by right of destiny," Marcus replied, his voice dropping to that dangerous tone Eleanor recognised. "The mate bond supersedes any mortal contract." "Prove it," Darius snarled. The formal combat ceremony began with ancient rituals Eleanor didn't fully understand. A neutral arbitrator, an elderly alpha from the Western Territories, read the terms of the challenge in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall. Representatives from both the Northern and Eastern Territories bore witness, their faces grave with the understanding that this fight would have consequences far beyond one woman's marriage. But for Elena, nothing existed beyond the two men who would soon be trying to kill each other over her future. "The combat will be conducted in wolf form," the arbitrator announced. "The first to yield or fall will forfeit their claim. Do both parties understand and accept these terms?" "I accept," Marcus said clearly. "I accept," Darius echoed, his voice eager with anticipation. The arbitrator turned to Elena, his weathered face kind but implacable. "Elena Thornfield, you must now declare your choice publicly before these witnesses. Who do you claim as your chosen mate?" Elena's mouth went dry as hundreds of eyes focused on her. She could feel the weight of history in this moment, the knowledge that her words would be recorded in the annals of supernatural law. But when she looked at Marcus, the golden thread between them blazed with such certainty that her fear evaporated. "I choose Marcus Ravencrest," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "Alpha King of the Northern Realm, my destined mate, my beloved, my choice." Power exploded through their bond like lightning striking. Elena gasped as she felt Marcus's strength magnify, fed by her public declaration and the mate bond that connected their very souls. His silver eyes blazed brighter, and she saw something like awe cross his features as he felt the full force of their connection. "Let the combat begin," the arbitrator declared. Both men began to shift simultaneously, and Eleanor watched in fascination and terror as Marcus transformed into his massive silver wolf. But this time was different. Enhanced by Elena's declaration and their fully acknowledged bond, he was larger than before, his silver fur gleaming like moonlight on water, his eyes blazing with supernatural fire. Darius's wolf was impressive, black as midnight with red eyes that promised violence, but next to Marcus he looked almost ordinary. The fight that followed was unlike anything Elena could have imagined. Darius attacked first, lunging with the brutal efficiency of someone who had killed many opponents. But Marcus was faster, enhanced by their bond, slipping aside from the attack with fluid grace, before striking back with precision that spoke of superior training. They circled each other in the cleared space, snarling and testing for weaknesses. Darius was physical power and brute force, relying on his size and vicious nature to overwhelm opponents. Marcus was strategy and supernatural strength, every movement calculated for maximum impact. When they clashed again, the sound echoed through the hall like thunder. Elena watched in horror as Darius's fangs found purchase in Marcus's shoulder, drawing silver blood that sparkled in the fading sunlight. But Marcus's response was swift and devastating. A strike to Darius's flank that sent the larger wolf tumbling across the marble floor. "First blood to Ravencrest!" someone called from the watching crowd. But Darius was far from finished. He rolled to his feet with surprising agility for his size and charged again, this time with a fighter's cunning instead of mere aggression. Elena's heart stopped as she watched him feint left before striking right, his claws raking across Marcus's ribs in a move that would have felled a lesser opponent. Marcus stumbled, silver blood matting his fur, and Elena felt his pain echo through their bond like fire in her veins. Without thinking, she stepped forward, her hands reaching toward him. "Marcus," she breathed, and somehow her voice carried across the combat space. Their eyes met, silver wolf meeting human, and Eleanor felt their bond flare with renewed strength. She was feeding him her courage, her love, her absolute faith in his ability to win. Marcus straightened, his wounds already beginning to heal with supernatural speed, and turned back to face Darius with renewed determination. What happened next would be talked about in supernatural circles for generations. Marcus didn't just fight Darius, he dominated him. Enhanced by Elena's love and their completed mate bond, he moved like liquid silver, striking with precision that left Darius reeling. Every attack was perfectly calculated, every defense flawless. But Darius, facing defeat for perhaps the first time in his brutal life, resorted to the kind of dirty tactics that had made him feared across the Eastern Territories. As Marcus closed in for what should have been the finishing blow, Darius rolled aside and struck at Marcus's legs, trying to cripple him. Eleanor's scream of anguish rang through the hall as Marcus stumbled, and in that moment of distraction, Darius lunged for his throat. Time seemed to slow. Elena watched the black wolf's fangs reaching for Marcus's vulnerable neck, saw the triumph already blazing in those red eyes. Something inside her chest exploded. Not the golden thread, but something deeper, more primal. The mate bond didn't just connect her to Marcus. It made them two halves of a greater whole. Elena didn't consciously decide to share her strength with Marcus. The bond simply opened fully between them, and her human determination and love poured into his wolf form like liquid fire. Marcus's eyes blazed silver white, and when he moved, it was with power that transcended the merely physical. He caught Darius mid-lunge, his jaws closing around the black wolf's throat with inexorable force. For a moment they hung suspended, predator and prey locked in the ancient dance of dominance. Then Darius went limp, the submission gesture of a defeated alpha. The hall erupted in cheers, but Elena heard nothing beyond her own heartbeat and the sound of Marcus shifting back to human form. He stood over Darius's still prone wolf, magnificent and terrible, silver blood streaming from his wounds, but his eyes blazing with triumph. Darius Blackwood yields, the arbitrator announced formally. The marriage contract is void. Elena Thornfield is free to accept the mate bond with Alpha King Marcus Ravencrest. Elena was running before she consciously decided to move, crossing the combat space to throw herself into Marcus's arms. He caught her against his chest, spinning her around as the crowd roared its approval. "You did it," she whispered against his neck, tasting salt and copper and the wild scent that was uniquely his. "You won." "We won," Marcus corrected, setting her down but keeping her close. "Elena, what you did at the end, sharing your strength through the bond, that's something that only happens between true mates. You saved my life." Elena looked up at him, seeing her own wonder reflected in his silver eyes. "I felt it when you were in danger, like my heart was being torn out. I couldn't let anything happen to you." Marcus cupped her face in his bloodied hands, his expression soft despite the violence they'd just witnessed. "Elena Thornfield, will you accept the mate bond fully? Will you stand beside me as my equal, my partner, my queen?" Elena felt the golden thread between them blazing like a star, felt the rightness of this moment settling into her bones, like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. "Yes," she whispered, loud enough for the assembled crowd to hear. "Forever and always, yes." When Marcus kissed her this time, the mate bond completed itself with a flash of power that sent ripples through every supernatural being in the hall. Eleanor felt Marcus's strength flowing through her even as her love strengthened him, creating a connection that transcended anything she'd ever imagined possible. They were mated, bonded, claimed and claiming in return. Around them, the crowd cheered and stamped their approval, but Eleanor barely heard them. She was home at last, in the arms of the man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, who had fought for her and won not just her freedom, but her heart. The golden thread was no longer a thread, but a golden chain that bound them soul to soul, unbreakable and eternal. Elena Thornfield, Blacksmith's daughter, was dead. In her place stood Eleanor Ravencrest, future queen of the Northern Realm, beloved mate of the Alpha King, and for the first time in her life she knew exactly who she was meant to be. 6 months had passed since the trial by combat that changed everything, and Elena could hardly recognise the woman she'd been before. Standing in the throne room of Ravenshollow beside Marcus, wearing robes of midnight blue silk embroidered with silver ravens, she felt the weight of her crown, light as it was, settling naturally on her brow. "The delegation from the Southern Valleys requests an audience regarding the trade disputes," Thomas announced from the throne room entrance, his voice carrying the respect he'd always shown her, but now with the added deference due to a queen. Elena exchanged a glance with Marcus, their silent communication one of the many gifts their completed mate bond had brought them. She could feel his amusement through their connection, along with his pride in how naturally she'd taken to the diplomatic aspects of ruling. "We'll see them after the noon meal," Elena decided. "The village representatives from Millbrook are scheduled first. Their harvest concerns take precedence." Marcus's approval flowed through their bond like warm honey. In the months since their mating, they'd discovered that Elena's empathy for common struggles, combined with her intuitive understanding of practical solutions, made her invaluable in settling disputes and managing the realm's domestic affairs. Where Marcus handled military strategy and interpack politics, Elena focused on the day-to-day welfare of their people. "Your Majesty!" called a familiar voice from across the throne room. Elena turned to see her father approaching, his step light and confident in a way she hadn't seen since before her mother's death. The royal smithy had given him purpose again, and his face bore the healthy glow of a man who'd found peace with his past mistakes. "Father," Elena said warmly, stepping down from the dais to embrace him. The easy affection between them was another gift of her new life. Without the constant worry about money and survival, they'd been able to rebuild their relationship on stronger foundations. "The ceremonial swords for the autumn festival are complete," he reported, his voice full of pride. "Though I still say it's strange having my daughter inspect my work as queen." Elena laughed, the sound echoing through the vast space. "You're still my father first, your majesty second. Besides, no one knows metalwork like you do. I trust your craftsmanship more than any royal decree could ensure." Marcus joined them, his hand finding the small of Elena's back in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "How are the preparations for the festival coming along?" he asked Elena. "Better than expected," Elena replied, her mind already organising the dozens of details that went into celebrating the autumn harvest. The Southern Valley's grain surplus should more than make up for the drought damage in the eastern regions, and the new trade agreements you negotiated with the mountain clans will ensure we have enough preserved meat for the winter months. It was a conversation that would have been impossible 6 months ago, when Elena had been a blacksmith's daughter who barely understood how to manage a small cottage, let alone a kingdom. But the mate bond had awakened abilities in her she'd never known she possessed, enhanced intuition that helped her read people's true intentions, strategic thinking that complemented Marcus's military expertise, and a natural charisma that made even the most sceptical nobles listen when she spoke. "Elena," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying the private warmth he reserved for her alone, "there's something I want to show you before the afternoon audiences begin." Curious, Elena followed him through corridors she now knew as well as she'd once known the paths around her village. But instead of heading toward their private chambers, Marcus led her to a part of the palace she rarely visited, the tower that overlooked the northern gardens. "What is this about?" Elena asked as they climbed the narrow spiral stairs. "Patience," Marcus replied, though she could feel his excitement through their bond, mixed with something that felt like nervous anticipation. The room at the top of the tower had been transformed since Elena had last seen it. What had once been a dusty storage space was now a bright, airy chamber with windows on all sides, offering views of the entire realm. Maps covered one wall, marked with Elena's suggestions for improving trade routes and resource distribution. Another wall held sketches and plans for the schools Elena wanted to establish in the outer villages. But what made Elena's breath catch was the third wall, covered with detailed drawings of a building she'd never seen, but somehow recognised. "A sanctuary," she whispered, moving closer to study the architectural plans. "For families caught in debt cycles, like father was." "Your idea," Marcus confirmed, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "You mentioned it weeks ago, how no one should face what you and your father went through. I had the royal architects draw up plans based on your specifications." Elena leaned back against his chest, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was seeing. The building in the drawings would house dozens of families, provide job training, offer legal assistance for those trapped by predatory lending. It was everything she'd dreamed of, but never dared hope could become reality. "Marcus," she breathed, turning in his arms, "it's perfect, but the cost is irrelevant," Marcus finished firmly. "Elena, you've transformed this realm in ways I never could have managed alone. The trade disputes we've settled, the alliances you've forged, the loyalty you've inspired in our people. The economic benefits of your leadership have already paid for this sanctuary 10 times over." Through their bond, Elena felt the absolute truth of his words, along with something deeper. Marcus's love for her had only grown stronger as he'd watched her find her place as queen. She wasn't just his mate anymore, she was his equal partner in every sense, and his respect for her abilities shone through their connection like sunlight. "When can we break ground?" Elena asked, her practical mind already shifting to implementation details. Marcus laughed, the sound rich with affection. I knew you'd say that. The site is already prepared, and construction begins next month. You'll oversee the entire project naturally. Eleanor stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, pouring her gratitude and love through their mate bond. When they broke apart, both were breathing harder, the golden chain between them humming with contentment. "Have I mentioned lately that you're amazing?" Elena murmured against his lips. "Not in the last hour," Marcus replied, with mock solemnity. "I was beginning to worry." They might have gotten distracted by the playful banter that had become their private language, but a soft knock at the door reminded them of their royal duties. "Your Majesties," Thomas called, "the Millbrook delegation has arrived." Elena sighed, reluctantly pulling away from Marcus's embrace. "Back to work." "Together," Marcus reminded her, offering his arm with the same formal courtesy he'd shown her from their very first meeting. As they descended the tower stairs, Elena reflected on how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been desperate and afraid, convinced she was worthless, offering herself as payment for debts she couldn't comprehend. Now she was queen of the Northern Realm, partner to the most powerful alpha alive, architect of policies that would improve thousands of lives. The afternoon passed in the usual blur of audiences and decisions. The Millbrook representatives were worried about wolf-pack encroachment on their farmland, a problem Elena solved by suggesting a formal treaty that would give the wolves hunting rights in exchange for protecting the village from bandits. The Southern Valley's trade delegation was placated with Elena's proposal for a new festival celebrating their agricultural contributions, which would boost both trade and diplomatic relations. With each problem solved, each decision that benefited their people, Elena felt the golden chain of their mate bond pulse with satisfaction. Marcus's pride in her leadership flowed through their connection like a constant stream of warmth, and she knew her own confidence in return strengthened him for the more challenging aspects of rulership. As the sun set beyond the great windows, painting the throne room in shades of gold and amber, Eleanor found herself thinking about the woman who had stood in her father's study all those months ago, trembling and terrified as she faced a mysterious debt collector. That woman would never have imagined she could belong in a place like this, could wear a crown and make decisions that affected entire kingdoms. But Marcus had seen something in her that she couldn't see in herself, not just potential, but actual worth waiting to be recognised. "Copper for your thoughts," Marcus said softly, using the phrase that had become their private joke. Elena smiled, settling more comfortably on her throne, a piece of furniture that had been crafted specifically to match Marcus's, symbolising their equal partnership in ruling. "I was thinking about debt collectors and desperate bargains." Marcus's expression grew tender. "Any regrets?" Elena considered the question seriously, feeling through their bond to examine her true feelings. The woman she'd been was gone, transformed so completely that sometimes Elena felt like she was remembering someone else's life. But that transformation hadn't been a loss. It had been a becoming. "None," she said finally. "That desperate woman who offered herself as payment saved both our lives, Marcus. Without her courage, you never would have found your mate, and I never would have found myself." Marcus leaned over to take her hand, their fingers interlocking with practised ease. "She was worthy then, just as you are worthy now. The only difference is that now you know it." Through their mate bond, Elena felt the absolute certainty of his love, the rock-steady foundation of his faith in her. But more than that, she felt her own strength, not borrowed from him, but inherent and recognised at last. "Your Majesty," Thomas approached with the careful deference he showed when interrupting private moments. "The evening meal is prepared." Elena rose from her throne with fluid grace, the weight of her crown feeling as natural as her own heartbeat. As they walked toward the private dining chamber, they preferred for quiet evenings, Marcus's hand warm in hers, Elena felt the golden chain of their bond humming with perfect contentment. Outside their windows, the northern realm stretched away into twilight, thousands of people living their lives under the protection and guidance of their king and queen. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve their people and strengthen their partnership. But tonight belonged to them, to the debt collector who had been an Alpha King and the desperate woman who had become his equal in every way that mattered. Elena's journey from desperation to destiny was complete, but their story together was just beginning. And as they settled into the warm intimacy of their private chambers, the golden chain that bound them soul to soul whispered of all the adventures yet to come. She had offered herself to save her father's life, and in return, she had found her own. Elena's story proves that sometimes our lowest moments lead to our greatest blessings, and that patient love can heal wounds we didn't even know existed. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments and celebrate the power of love that sees our worth even when we can't see it ourselves. If stories like Elena's bring you joy, please subscribe to support more tales of fated love and destined partnerships. Until our next journey together, remember, you deserve a love that recognizes your true value just as you are.